Hello, my name is David Wood, Group Finance Director of Urban&Civic plc. We specialise in a master developer role, which is taking large plots of land through planning, infrastructuring, so building schools and roads, and then allowing the house builders to come on our sites to build houses. My main tasks as Group FD are for the financial strategy of the business, and it also includes responsibilities over tax, treasury functions, IT, and also external and internal financial reporting. A key part of the role actually is getting out and meeting people. It's a key skill that you need as a Group Finance Director. You have many stakeholders in the business, that's both external and internal. So you meet investors, external investors, bankers, your customers, as well as your own teams internally. So you often have a large finance department, but your finance stems and stretches much beyond that. You have professional advisors entering into documentations with you, and also you tend to liaise with your own internal property teams as well. So actually, finance department covers a large cross-section of the internal and external corporate environment. Much like the role in itself, because you have a broad reach, your actual key skills have to be quite broad as well, especially the higher you get up the organisation. So it starts off, with accountants need to be good at maths, clearly. Actually, mental arithmetic was never a huge skill of mine, and it's not a huge skill of many accountants, but there is a certain logic of the way the brain works. English becomes more important, and you need to be able to write a good report. So those key metrics that everyone talks about very much when you're at school, being maths and English, actually are quite important as you go through your career. So don't give up on that. You need to add other skills as you go through. So when you're working and expanding your roles, your key skills will be things like interpersonal skills, communication skills. Your leadership skills become more important, and ultimately you become a salesperson for your company as well as yourself throughout life. So actually you have to work on those relationship skills. Ambition and drive is clearly a good thing to have, because that will spur you on to be better in all of those areas. The traditional route that many Group FDs go down is effectively a degree, and you try to get as decent and as good a degree as you possibly can, and then you will effectively enter into a training contract. Once you've got into a training contract, you'll have a period of 3 to 4 years, effectively all things going well, of professional qualification. After that point, that sets you on a pretty steady road as to where you can go. Your choices as to what fields you do after that tend to come down to your drive and your ambition in those particular areas. From my personal route, I did a chartered accountancy qualification with Deloitte, which was formerly Touche Ross when I joined it. I left there when I was 26, and I didn't know what industry I particularly wanted to do, but what I did know is that I wanted to build something, and it didn't really matter what it was. It could have been cars, it could have been engineering. It was just something, I wanted something tangible rather than a financial product, and therefore I went into a property company that specialised in central London development, shopping centres and urban regeneration, and that certainly ticked all my boxes. It was really great to be involved with effectively changing the place that you live in and surrounds you, and it affects a lot of people's lives in London. So that was a tremendously important part of my role. From there on, in terms of how you progressed in those things, I stayed actually with my first post-qualification company for nearly 10 years. But the important thing with my progression was to make sure that I added skills all the time I was there. I ended up being Group Financial Controller towards the end of my time at the first company, and from there on, for about 3 or 4 roles, I went from Group Financial Controller to Group Financial Controller in the listed market environment. So actually I was becoming battle hardened all the time. I was going through takeovers and corporate transactions, and again I was just adding to my skills. So keep going, keep adding to your skill base, and before you know it, actually you start to become more qualified, than those around you, and that will naturally lead through to promotion. University or apprenticeships is a good question. I have very little experience, I must say, of apprenticeships. All I would say is that actually I don't believe there's a one-size-fits-all, and therefore I think just going down an apprenticeship route, for example, doesn't mean that you can't progress through to where you want to be. I've had auditors in the past, BDO in particular, who effectively took on both graduates through their training programs, but also school leavers, both at A level and GCSE level. And that's quite important because, you know, those are companies which are quite large, well-funded, great training programs, but actually they see the value in offering a different type of candidate a role, because it brings a breadth of personalities and skills to the company. And unfortunately, if you're a smaller company, you can't always afford to take on that responsibility and that additional burden of taking through the early stages and giving that mentoring. But most of the large companies will have well-structured training programs at all levels. So, you know, from my point of view, a university degree is a nice to have, but it's certainly not the be all and end all, and it very much depends on the role as well that you want to do. Salary expectations, that's always an interesting one, especially as someone who employs many people. It's always a contentious start. I think really these days it's quite a broad range of salary expectations. London clearly is a hotter market, therefore you have a London weighting, and that's really that's the market that I tend to recruit mostly in, so that's the one that I have the most current experience with. When I first started on my first training contract, it was a mighty £12,500. It was some time ago. Now you're looking at £30,000 sort of range during that training contract. And really, when you start to do post-qualification, again, it depends what you do. You initially have a big jump, so you're up to sort of 40, 45,000. If you're doing ledgers and various other bits and pieces, it's at that sort of range. But the reality is that can rise pretty quickly to sort of that 50, 60, 70,000 range when you're adding skills all the time. So the important thing is getting yourself up the job families by adding your skills. And actually what happens is, as an accountant, as a seasoned accountant, you can expect to earn six-figure salaries. And going beyond that is always the challenge. When you get to those sorts of parts, if you want to be paid more, it becomes harder. You have a much quicker exponential start, and then you slow down a bit, and then you've really got to jump job families in order to get to the next level. And when I talk about job families, it's effectively a role. So instead of being in charge of ledgers, for example, you might be a particular project accountant, and then you might be a senior project accountant, and then a project, some form of director of things. So as you step up the company, almost your job titles will echo the steps that you can expect to be paid. But as I say, I think really six-figure salaries are the aim when you start getting to more senior roles. It's a competitive world out there. There are lots of people that are wanting job and work experience from good companies. So first of all, you can expect, if it's a good company, you can expect there to be some competition for those roles. So you've got to think about what would set you apart when you're either trying to contact them or starting to put together your CV, which is always a good thing to think about, even when you're looking for some work experience. You know, what skills have I got that sets me apart from somewhere else? That might be a hobby, that might be an interest, you know, and actually that interest might drive you to the company that you want to work for. And I think that's a good starting point, is having a sit down and a good think about what type of company, whether that might be in the charity sector, for example, if you had a particular passion for the environment or something like that, that would naturally lead you to think about what companies you wanted to do work experience for. So that's step one. where do you want to work for your 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long it is? Do they then have a natural program that you can apply to? Because it might be relatively straightforward. You might be able to go online and see that they effectively have a summer placement program, for example, and therefore that makes life a lot easier and it's open to all. There'll be total meritocracy. You'll end up putting in your CV and a request, and you'll probably go to an interview in that process. So that's relatively straightforward. The parents or your connections, that's clearly an easy route through, because you can always ask them. Friends, there's another route. If you know people, they can obviously be another access point. After that, what you're really looking at is starting to think about maybe some press. You know, what companies are in the press? What companies are taking on people, expanding? You know, companies that are financially in trouble are not going to necessarily be interested in taking summer placements. So target your company as well. Target those that effectively are successful. Then one of your routes that you can do is obviously to write directly to the company. The requests that I receive that resonate with me, that I spend more time, are personalised to my company. So it would be, hello David, I'm really interested in not just property. If you start with a general point, that is not tailored enough. You say, I've been to your Alconbury site and I'm absolutely fascinated. I'm 16 years old. It's exciting. If you open up with a line like that, that's much better. If you just come with a generic, I'm interested in property, everyone is interested in property that comes along to the company. So think how, again, you can differentiate yourself. Because even though it's a summer placement, you never know where it's going to lead. You know, there are people that have come along to my company that I would employ in the future, and that was from a summer placement. So good luck. You've got to think what you're going to be good at. You know, there's no point. You know, I'd love to be a rock star playing a guitar, but I can't play a guitar, and my rock voice isn't very good either. So those sorts of things are not going to work. You've got to think about what you're good at and what you've got enthusiasm for, and really you've got to try a few things. You know, don't be afraid to try a few things out. In some ways, you know, one of the unfortunate things for me was that I started in the workplace during the depths of the 1991 recession, and actually choices were very limited. You know, at that time you could get a job in a supermarket. So, you know, for me, actually, the only people who were recruiting around that time were the accountancy firms, and therefore sort of I went down this route. Actually, to be honest, it's given me a very fruitful, enjoyable existence and training, but I don't think there's any harm in having a go, trying a few different roles for things before you settle. Certainly when people come to Urban&Civic for an interview, it's part of that rich history. If you can see a sense and a back catalogue of achievement, then actually that puts you on that path, and you know, anyone looking at your CV will understand.